I always wondered why when airline pilots do the pre-flight walk-arounds, they don't extend the flaps before inspecting them, because you can't see much with the flaps closed. So why am I flapping on about flaps? Well, last week, while some of you were busy celebrating America's Independence Day from those pesky Brits 249 years ago, that's okay, England, we got over it. But last week, Delta Airlines was busy continuing its side hustle of distributing airline parts across America. And I say parts because this isn't the first time, but I'll get to that in a minute. But first, late Tuesday night, July 1st, after suffering a string of delays and a thunderstorm, Delta Airlines Flight 3247, a Boeing 737-900, finally departed Atlanta Airport at 11:06 p.m. for Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, with 6 crew members and 109 passengers on board. And what all on board thought was just a normal flight that landed safely at 1:15 a.m. local time in the early morning hours of July 2nd. Well, this flight was anything but routine. That's because while pulling into the gate, one of the ground crew alerted the pilot that there was a piece missing from his plane, which came as news to the pilot because no one on the flight deck had any clue when they put down the flaps for landing that morning exactly how far down they actually lowered the flaps. But as it turned out, pretty darn low, as in all the way to the ground low. Because a few miles from Raleigh-Durham Airport, a concerned citizen was on the phone with 911, complaining that a large piece of sheet metal had fallen from the sky and suddenly appeared in his driveway. And he wasn't too happy either because it almost hit his family sedan. So putting 2 and 2 together, that's when the FAA launched an investigation into how the Boeing Delta 737 could have lost its flap mid-flight. The trailing edge flap landed in the middle of the Raleigh homeowner's driveway, like I said, just a few yards from their parked car, of course scaring the crap out of the homeowner, who eventually called 911, but also scaring the entire neighborhood in the process. However, remarkably, no injuries on the ground were reported, which is just crazy because it is described as a fairly dense neighborhood. One of the neighbors told the local news that they really dodged a bullet on this one, and yeah, she was right. So as of now, the FAA is investigating, and it will take some time to find out exactly what happened. However, with that said, there is no evidence that a pre-flight inspection had anything to do with this incident, just some useless musing by me. But beyond this recent flap, so to speak, Delta has had a pretty rough start to the year of 2025. Beginning in February when Flight 4819, a Bombardier CRJ-900, crashed while landing at Toronto Pearson International Airport, causing it to flip over on the runway. There were 21 injuries reported, but all passengers and crew survived. Then on February 24, 2025, Delta Flight 876, a Boeing 717 flying from Atlanta to Columbia, was forced to make an emergency landing back at Atlanta shortly after takeoff after the cabin filled with thick smoke during the flight. Once the aircraft returned to Atlanta, the passengers were evacuated safely via the plane's evacuation slides. All 99 people on board survived. Then April 21, 2025, Delta Airlines Flight 1213, an Airbus A330, traveling from Orlando to Atlanta International Airport, its right engine caught fire before takeoff. 282 passengers evacuated the aircraft, again, on the emergency slides, and nobody was injured. And speaking of emergency slides, this latest flap incident isn't the first time Delta has delivered some aircraft parts to an unsuspecting neighborhood down below. On April 26 last year in 2024, around 8:30 a.m., Delta Flight 520 left JFK Airport about an hour earlier for Los Angeles. In this case, at least alarms went off in the cockpit, alerting pilots to a big problem when the plane's emergency slide was jettisoned from the aircraft just after takeoff over the Atlantic Ocean. However, to make matters worse, 2 days later, the emergency slide washed up in front of the beach house of a lawyer. Oh, no, wait, this gets better. But this lawyer whose house on which the slide washed up on his beach, and he was coincidentally the guy that found the slide. Well, this lawyer, Jake Bissell-Link, and his law firm had recently filed a lawsuit against Boeing earlier that year following the Alaska Airlines door blowout in January of 2024, in which that plane's door plug was launched to the earth to another unsuspecting neighborhood below. And as we all know, that was also a miraculous case where nobody on the ground was hurt by the door plug or the iPhone that went out with it. But in that case, Delta Airlines Flight 520 returned safely to JFK Airport in New York around 8:35 a.m. on Friday, April 26, after the crew reported a vibration and declared an emergency. But wait, there's more. Because like I said, Delta has been in the aircraft parts delivery business for a while now. And emergency slides seem to be their specialty. Because in December of 2019, a large inflatable slide fell from the sky onto a Massachusetts man's yard. The emergency inflatable egress device came crashing down from a Delta flight flying from Paris to Boston. In that case, the homeowner, Wei-Han Huang of Milton, Massachusetts, told the local news that he was doing yard work when the slide landed, crushing a few branches on a Japanese maple tree in his yard. Huang said, "It's kind of crazy. Who could know there's something coming from the air and drops into my yard, right?" Said it's pretty heavy too, you can't even carry it. Huang called the police and the FAA was dispatched to pick up the slide. And a couple of other recent Delta mishaps of note. August 27, 2024, a Delta Boeing 757 was undergoing maintenance when a tire explosion sadly killed a Delta Airlines employee and a contractor and injured another Delta Airlines employee in a maintenance facility at Atlanta. September 10, 2024, Delta Flight 295, an Airbus A350 with 236 people on board, collided with another Delta plane, a CRJ 900 with 59 people on board, also at Atlanta International Airport. Both aircraft were damaged, but there were no reports of injuries. And the most gruesome incident happened on June 23, 2023, when Delta Airlines Flight 1111, an Airbus A319, was taxiing to the gate after landing at San Antonio International Airport, when an airport ramp worker was ingested into the right engine. Of course, the worker did not survive. However, incredibly, the incident was sadly ruled, self-inflicted by the worker. Read between the YouTube lines there. And to be fair, it's just not Delta Airlines delivering parts all over the United States. We've seen a rash of recent incidents. Back in February of 2024, the United Airlines Boeing 737-800 lost an engine cowling during takeoff from San Francisco, which fell into a parking lot. No one was injured. March 7, 2024, a tire fell off a United Airlines Boeing 777 shortly after takeoff from San Francisco. That plane landed safely. And who could forget this classic 2021 incident when a United Airlines Boeing 777-200 bound for Honolulu suffered an engine failure shortly after takeoff from Denver, which resulted in a spectacular viral video moment. And the list goes on and on. But this just goes to show the importance of airlines maintaining their fleets. So are these incidents a sign that airlines are failing to properly do so, or are these incidents just more visible because of social media? I don't know for sure, but I do know that you can only dodge a bullet so many times before there will be a disaster on the ground as a result of one of these mishaps. And then who gets the blame? So what do you think? Are airlines getting sloppy, or is it just because of our access to more stories on social media these days? Be sure and let me know down below. And until next time, this is Maximus.